Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Dr. Thomason, roll call.
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that we have all 5 board members present and counted for tonight.
Thank you. And we're going to have our moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And we just ask that we keep our Higley High School family in mind with the loss of a student this last week. All right, we'll go on with our agenda. I move that we approve the agenda as presented. Support. Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. Consent agenda. I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the consent agenda?
President Reese.
Mrs. Kaler?
I noticed that on 3.12, our booster club and PTO submitted. Mrs. Good's not here tonight, is she? I'm just wondering why we're not having all of our clubs and boosters under this umbrella per se. And is this optional? Why is it optional? If it is, what's the benefit? What's the non-benefit? Does anybody have these answers?
President Reese, members of the board, we are working to have consistency across the district, and we are asking all of our booster clubs to become under this umbrella for our board to approve, and so that we can have the consistency so they would be covered under any of the claims or liabilities that could occur within the Higley Unified School District. So we are working with them, and slowly this list will grow, and every year we'll add more and more booster clubs to it that fall underneath the umbrella.
So it's kind of a yearly thing that they can add into, or am I understanding, or they should be under it this year?
Everyone should be under it this year. It should be approved by the board.
Gotcha.
We're working with them to get the proper paperwork turned in so they can be approved by the board. And so we will continue to grow the list as paperwork's turned in and completed for the district.
Well, and just to follow up, I think the question was, what if somebody doesn't? Are they still covered?
Well, it's interesting. I asked the exact same question to our trust, and we would still be covered, but then our trust insurance may go up. We may have other consequences because of that. We may be asked to have more trainings. Actually, what we're doing is being done because of the request of the trust.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good thing to have. And I appreciate Ms. Reach keeping a running list for us, too. Thank you.
Also, President Reese, I don't know if anybody can answer this as well. 3.10, I just wanted to kind of talk about for a second. Let me get there, sorry. Student absences. This is talking about approve the amendment to policy JH and what constitutes an absence or an excuse. I know that this year we instituted the sweep policies at our high schools. So how is this affecting our funding per se when it comes to absences versus a tardy, the sweep going on, then they're considered just tardy still? Are they considered absent? Is that affecting that at all?
Okay. For a student to be considered absent from class, they would have to miss more than half the class. And so at this time, when they come in and they're tardy to the sweep, we still get full funding for them for that time because they are on school campus, they're still within the school. And they're expected to do academic work while they're in sweep. I mean, they could work on reading, math, language arts, whatever homework they have, but sweep is not just a time for students to go in and play and have fun.
Madam President, just, may I? Just to tag on, I think the policy, I've read it and reread it, and I think it's definitely more clear, and I thank you for the work on the policy part there.
And Madam President, most of it is referencing the statutes at the bottom. The state's kind of mandated what we have to say, so.
Yes, and our policy committee is continuing to go through our policies to make sure they're updated. Any change in statute to make sure we're following the changes in statute, as well as trying to create some consistency within the language of all of our policies. Any other questions or comments on consent?
Madam President?
Mr. Glover?
Just a few. I always like to take time to point out and thank the folks who take our kids on field trips. So this week's episode is the Highland High School, the Higley's, pardon me, the Higley High Theater Department, the Journalism and Yearbook Programs, the Sossaman Fine Arts, Williamsfield Engineering. Those teachers giving of their time, I'm grateful, and for the kids to make some of the memories and connections that you make only on field trips. And then to some of our staff in item 3.6, I think Mr. Harris, the OLS conference, the Title I ESSA conference, CTE, AVID video production instructors giving of their time, taking time away from their families for the benefit of Higley. So I always like to mention and thank them. And I had one more. Oh, I did it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to see what comes out of the audio-video training that both of our teachers will be attending from our high schools. And I read the brochure that they included, and it looks pretty exciting, and I can't wait to see what comes out of that. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Now we will go on to our presentations for the evening. And 4.1 is our monthly governing board financial report for August. Again, thank you, Mr. Holland, for putting that together for us. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Holland on the August report? No. Thank you. And then we'll go on to Mr. Holland for our presentation of fiscal year 18 annual financial report.
Can you hear me? Good. We're hoping that we've worked out the bugs. We'll see. So, good evening, President Reese, members of the board, Dr. Thompson, cabinet, or distinguished Higley community. Tonight, I'd like to present to you the annual financial report for the 17-18 school year. You will notice in front of you that I have left you guys a little bit of a treat. Since I was not able to bring you some popcorn, I brought you some money, or candy, to nibble on as you enjoy the show. So just a quick review in some fun Higley facts. So last year, in the 17-18 school year, we had 13,189 students enrolled in our district. We had 1,389 employees. During that time, we had 206,958 minutes of instruction. We issued 33,868 paychecks for a total of a little over 66.6 million. We served a little over 768,000 meals. And we drove 736,676 miles, which actually equates to 29.6 times around the world. Okay, so now I gave you some fun facts. Now I'm going to give you a joke before we get to the numbers. Okay, so what did the quarter say to the penny? Come on, give me something. You don't make much sense. Da-dum-dum. So our next one, if money doesn't grow on trees, then why do banks have branches? Don't know. Okay, so now we're going to look at our expenditures as a whole. So last year we spent a little over $119 million. That breaks down to, in our M&O budget, we spent $68,164,187. In our classroom site fund, or our Prop 301, we spent a little over 4.9. In our instructional improvement or Indian gaming revenue, we spent a little over $237,000. And keep in mind that the Indian gaming revenue does come in only twice a year, in January and June, and those funds are specifically used for teacher salaries and benefits. Next, we had some unrestricted capital of a little over 5.6, as well as some bond SFB, so it's building renewal or SFB funds. There we spent a little over 8.8 million. Our debt service, a little over 9.3. Keep in mind, so the revenue for that comes in from our taxes, and those funds are then used to pay down our principal and interest on our bonds, so our bond fees. We have some expenditures with Zion Bank, some principal reduction, as well as Stiefel, who is also one of our fiscal agencies that we work with for our financial planning for the future. We had some federal and state projects last year that we spent a little over 3.8 million. And then we have, of course, our special accounts, which consisted of our community ed, our Center for Performing Arts, or HCPA, our auxiliary operations, extracurricular, tax credit funding, gifts and donations. There we spent a little over 5.7 million. Please keep in mind, of course, that all of those accounts that we just referenced are cash accounts. Those funds can technically never be negative, and so basically treat them as if they were a checking account or a checkbook. A good way to think about those particular funds. So what does that look like from a pie perspective? So again, you have a little over 119 million. So you'll notice our M&O, remember that was a little over 68 million. That was 57% of our budget last year. Some other areas where we had larger numbers, so in our bond and building fund, or our SFB funding, that was about 8% of our budget last year. Our federal and state grants was about 3%, and our special cash accounts that we just spoke about was about 5% of our budget last year. Make sense? Questions? So specifically, what does that break down to our M&O? So our maintenance and operation budget last year was a little over 73.7 million. And as I mentioned, we spent a little over 68.1 million. How does that break down? Of course, salaries and benefits are always going to be your biggest expense. So there we had a little over 58.2 million. Our utilities, of course, are always continuing to increase each year, it seems. So there we had a little over 3.6 million. Supplies of about 3.7. So a few other ones, our other purchase services, kind of give you an idea what exactly makes up that $2.9 million expense. That's for travel, postage, advertising, tuition to private schools, some student transportation and communication expenses. Next, we have our dues and fees, which a small 416,000 comparatively speaking. Those funds were used for technology, network fees, professional memberships, licenses, and software that the district needs. And of course, last but not least, our purchase professional and technical services of a little over 1.7. And again, what makes that up? So you have employee training, you have audit, you have legal services, technical services, and then I also have a catch-all for student and other, which is basically last year the district utilized a third-party, Smart Schools, for all of our substitute teachers last year. So that expense is in that particular category. Again, for a total of a little over 68.1. We did have a balance of a little over 5.5.
Mr. Holland?
Yes,
Just
ma'am.
real quick, since you mentioned it, the tuition we pay for private schools, can you give a brief synopsis of what that is and why we have to pay that?
The tuition for private schools is for our specially placed or our SPED students. Those are students that we have to, that are outplaced outside of the district, maybe because that student has a very high need of something that maybe we're not able to accommodate, or the student that we've had within our district has some outbreaks, for lack of a better word at the moment. And so some of our teachers have been injured during those outbreaks, and in those particular situations, we have had to outplace those students as well for the safety of our students and staff.
So those are costs that we cover and we're responsible for,
That is correct.
and that cost typically exceeds the revenue we receive from the state.
Always.
So just wanted to make that clear, since you had mentioned that that's in here, that as a district, we do have to pay private tuition for some of our students. That is an additional expense above and beyond what the district is paid for the education of that student.
That is correct. It's mandated by law.
May I add to
Yes, sir.
that the public schools pay, not charter schools don't have that obligation, correct?
Put me in a tough spot.
President Reese, members of the board, charter schools do have that obligation, but they find ways to ensure that those students don't have the opportunity to go to those schools, and so they're referred back to local school districts. So legally, they have the obligation, but they don't service those students.
Thank you. Sorry.
No? Yes, sir.
Didn't mean to put this-
I'm like, how do I be politically correct with that one? So what does that look like, that 68 million from a pie perspective? Again, as I mentioned, salaries and benefits are always going to be your largest expense, so you'll notice that was 86% of our budget last year. Our utilities, as I mentioned, continue to keep going up and up. That was 5% of our budget. And then from there, you'll notice it breaks down to 1%, 2%. So small percentages comparative to the larger of the whole. Make sense? Good. Okay, so just a quick recap what we have gone over with our Higley M&O budget. Again, as I mentioned, last year's budget was a little over 73.7. We spent a little over 68.1, and we have a carryover amount a little over 5.5. Now that is the amount that we do typically try to shoot for something within that range, so we are able to help meet our upcoming demands for the next school year. So because that number is very close to what our carryover number was from the prior school year as well. We anticipate and plan to try to carry over that amount, because we do have, of course, being able to offset the increase in salary and benefits when we're able to give staff a raise, even if it's small, so that additional expense. We do have some technology updates. We're able to purchase uniforms, of course, whether it's sports, athletics, or maybe band, for example. And you never know what kind of other upcoming capital maintenance and repairs issues that you may have that you may not be able to go to the school facilities board to get funding in time to fix that air conditioner, for an example. And then, of course, we have our new curriculum that we adopted and started in the 16-17 year. So we try to make sure we're allocating some funding to continue that. But our biggest expense, of course, is our middle school lease payments. That expense last year was a little over $3.2 million. That expense this year increased to $4.2 million. And unfortunately, next year, that payment will increase again to $4.4 million, where that amount will at least cap, but it will stay until the lease is paid off, which ends in 2052-2053 school year. Now, I'm not sure how many of us will be around by then, but hopefully we can get it paid off sooner. So now I've given you a whole bunch of numbers. You're ready to go to sleep, right? So here's a question for you. Why did the teacher marry the janitor? Now, don't let me down, you guys. You've had this question before. Tick tock, tick tock. Huh? That's close. Because he swept her off of her feet. Okay, you guys, don't throw fruit.
And President Reese, members of the board, I just wanted to say that Gary has done an incredible job. And even though it looks like we have $5.5 million carryover, that is something that we bring year after year after year. So the carryover should be consistent. It's not that we're not spending all the money we get in 1 year. We want to continue to have that carryover. For one thing, it helps us not have to pay for our TANs, our tax anticipation notes, that in the past cost us quite a bit of money. Whenever you borrow money to start the year off, you do have to pay interest on that. And Mr. Holland has done an incredible job. And so even though it looks like there's $5.5 million carryover, it's really just startup funds, so we don't have to borrow money to continue going.
Exactly. Thank you, Isabel and Dina. They're right here. They're my faithful. They stick around night and day. We're very lucky to have them. Okay, so next, our next slide is our presentation regarding the Auditor General's Classroom Spending Report. So every year, the Auditor General compiles a report from statewide expenditures versus the district's expenditures versus our peer districts, which are those districts that are similar in size. So for the 16-17 school year, of course this is 1 year back, so for classroom instruction statewide, that percentage was a little about 53.8. Our peer district was 53.1, and here at Higley, ours was 59.8%. Our administration statewide was 10.4. Our peer district is basically 10.0, and the district is at 10.3. Some of the others that I'd just like to kind of point out, so our facilities, the statewide was 12, our peer is 12.4, and here at the district, we were able to keep those expenses down to a 10.5. Again, the more we can try to conserve in other areas, the more funds we're able to put back into our classrooms. The report for the 17-18 school year, of course, will not be finalized and available from the Auditor General until March of the following year. So the 17-18 report will come out around March, April of 19. At that time, I will then prepare a report and come back and present that data to you at that time.
Mr. Holland, can you go over the student support line on that, please?
Sure. Student support, those expenditures, are you asking me what makes that up? Those expenditures are support staff for out at the school sites, additional tutoring that may be necessary, student counselors. So you have our health aid expenses. I should have brought my book. I knew you were going to ask me some of these questions, and I always try to remember. Those are the things that quickly pop off the top of my head. But I can get more if you'd like. No? Okay. You know, one that I wanted to point out also is our transportation. So statewide, our transportation was 4.7. District, our peers, excuse me, is 5.0. And here at the district, our number was 4.6. Now, historically, the Auditor General has always dinged, for lack of a better word at the moment, dinged the district, indicating that our transportation expenses are too high. And so if you're ever looking at one of those Auditor General reports, they'll classify it as like red, blue, brown. And for our transportation, it was always in the red, because according to them, you know, they indicate that you should be busing students, those students that are greater than a mile outside of the district. However, the district chooses to bus our students within those boundaries as well, for the safety of our students. So we know that going in. We know that we're not going to get the full funding to cover that additional expense, but that is a decision that the district has decided to make. Does that make sense?
President Reese, members of the board, Higley Unified School District is unique in its makeup due to the railroad tracks and the canals that we have in our district. We don't want students traveling across those dangerous areas at the elementary and middle and high schools, and so we do provide transportation. In some cases, that's less than the walking radius of the school, because we don't want students making those treks across a canal or across a railroad track.
I just wanted to point that one out specifically because, as I said, every year that seems to be in the red, and this year it was very nice to see that we're lower than even statewide average and our peer districts. Next, we have our classroom site, or our Prop 301 funding. So at the beginning of the 17-18 school year, we had a beginning balance of a little over 2.5. We brought in a little over 5.5 million in revenue, and we spent a little over $4.9 million last school year. Again, please keep in mind that those funds are used to pay salaries and benefits for teachers only. And also out of Fund 12, you'll notice how it's clearly labeled performance pay. That is performance pay. That is paid out to our teachers. Here at the district, we pay it out twice a year, one in December, first half in December, and the second half usually July, August timeframe, after, of course, all of the test results and everything has come in from the state. So next we have our unrestricted capital. We started last year with a budget of a little over 15.5 million is what our allocation that we set. We spent a little over 5.6, and we have a remaining going into the 18-19 school year of a little over 9.7. Some of the things that I want to point out of what made up those actual 5.6 expenses. So keep in mind, of course, we still have our ongoing curriculum adoption, so we're continuing that. We'll be continuing that, of course, into the 18-19 year as well. We have technology updates in our technology refresh program. We had purchased student devices, laptops for last year, and we'll be purchasing more student devices this year. We had some building improvements. We did some improvements in our track and field areas, as well, again, athletic uniforms, band uniforms, but of course, it all comes down to the last one is our middle school lease payments. Again, we try to anticipate and plan for that expense because we know that that is the largest one of, I say one of our largest expenses. That's initial largest expense going into the year, basically, other than salaries, of course. And with it going up each year, we try to save as much money back as we can from the school year to help offset that increase going into the next year.
Mr. Holland, can I ask, is there, I guess first, what's the justification to have the budgetary numbers so high if you know what the anticipated expense is year over year? So it's listed at budgeted at 8 million, even though you knew, I think by agreement, we know what the annual lease payment is. You said in a couple of years it's going to be 4.2 million. Is there any reason, I guess you just budget higher so you can save more, like you said?
Well, again, we try to anticipate because we know we're going to have those expenses. So I try to encumber as much as we can afford last year to help meet that offset going into the new year. And as well as we know we have our curriculum adoption and we know have our IT refresh. So again, as much money as we can try to save to help meet that increased expense the next year, we do. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm still a little unclear, but we can probably talk afterwards. Just unclear why the budgeted number is so much higher than the actual lease payment year over year.
That's what Mr. Thornock's asking. That first column says what we were budgeting for, and that's
So
why
is
did
our
we budget 8 million when
it was
we
only,
right?
again, that was just kind of how we had allocated it out. So just because it was anticipated as a budget, that's only a suggestion, because your expenditures may be much larger in other categories. But I see what you mean now that I see the number you're talking about. I was like,
Yeah.
what, 8 million you're talking about?
And maybe this is a conversation for Dr. Thomason afterwards, but is there any incentive to accelerate payments on the lease payments if we have extra money to accelerate, push money towards? I mean, can we pay it down sooner? But maybe that, I don't want to derail the presentation. We can talk about it later.
Fine.
President Reese, members of the board, that's a really easy one to say that we have to wait 10 years before we can accelerate payments. So we are 10 years before we can take a look at doing something different with that.
And of course, I'll talk a little bit more about that in our next presentation. But again, we'll have to be able to come up with the funding to pay those schools off. And unfortunately, that's going to take a separate measure to try to generate that funding. Does that make sense? Again, this is just a quick recap. So some other capital funds we had last year that we spent. So we spent a little over 4.7 in bond funding, and we spent a little over 4.1 million in building renewal or SFB funds. Some of those projects from last year, again, I've mentioned some of them already, our technology refresh. We had some maintenance and repair projects that took place at Gateway, HTA, HTA Library. We had some floor upgrades. We had purchased some new marquees for Santan and Coronado. And we purchased marquees for the other elementaries in previous years that we have already had discussed, as well as we had some landscape, field work, courtyard remodels at Gateway, Higley, and Williamsfield, as you'll see as I continue on with the presentation this evening. So here are some of those projects that I was just referring to. So for example, here's our baseball fields. You can see the top one that was very dead, had a lot of dirt issues, seemed like it didn't matter how much water or how much seed you put on it, we couldn't get it to grow. However, Dr. Fowler and his team worked very diligently to till up that land, put as much seed and water on it as possible, and you can see what the outcome was at that point. Next is those marquees that I mentioned. Here's Coronado's marquee. Here's, we did some work at Gateway. So at Gateway, they had a weatherization project that SFB funded that portion, but there are also additional expenses that go into these these projects that the district is required to cover those expenses. So like, for example, as we do the new weatherization, we replace all the lighting at the schools, so the district is required to cover those expenses. You'll notice that the one building in the bottom right-hand corner, that was a building that the district had to cover repainting that particular building. That was a little bit of an issue dealing with when colors and everything were picked for that building. Once it all got applied, then it totally turned out to be a different look. And you'll notice we did some new turf, so you can see the playground there. All of these things, of course, took place at Gateway. So again, these are just some of the pictures of all the stuff that I've just been listing off or rattling off to you. So Higley High, here's some turf. Same sort of scenario. You can see what the turf looked like in the top. You can see it in the right-hand side as well. So how bad that football field is and that track as well. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go on through the evening. HTA, I mentioned some remodeling we did there, so you'll notice in the top, that is the library that was remodeled there at the school, as well as in the bottom, that is they refer to as the Hawk's Nest, the teacher's lounge staff area. That was completely redone, and they did an amazing job. Next is the marquee for Santan. Williamsfield, as you know, a lot of work took place at Williamsfield over the last couple of years. So there's that campus improvements. We also did some additional painting of emblems there at Williamsfield. And so that's all of my pictures that I have at the moment, as well as all the information that I have for you tonight regarding the annual financial report. Do you have any questions?
It does not look like it. Thank you for putting that together and being able to provide the explanations for us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for not going to sleep.
All right, so then we will move on to 4.3. And I move that we accept the annual financial report and authorize its publication.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0.
President Reese, members of the board, would like to also remind the public that all this information would be available on the Higley Unified School District website. If anybody wants to take a look at that, it's all the information for transparency purposes is up on our school website.
Perfect. I just want to remind the board members to be sure to sign the financial report before you leave. All right, so we will go on to 4.4. Dr. Fowler, I believe this is you, the artificial turf for Higley High School procurement.
President Reese, members of the governing board, just thank you for the opportunity tonight to speak about the possibility of bringing synthetic turf to Higley High School. So I reflect back on my years of experience in Arizona. One of my mentors, principal at Glendale High School, Margaret Garcia Dugan, said once to me, it's like you can go on Friday night and really get a pulse for how your high school is doing. In fact, my principal at Glendale felt that if you had a winning football team, it was going to be a good school year. And so using that model or that measurement, I would say right now, both Higley and Williamsfield are off to excellent starts. In fact, both teams are 5-0 in the state of Arizona. Both teams have only lost once this year, and that was to teams out of the state of Arizona. So anyway, I think if you, and I know a lot of you have been at Friday night events to see our football team, obviously, and the band and the cheerleaders, and just it is a neat event, and we have so much happening in our vibrant communities. And so just thank you for the opportunity to talk about, enhancing that experience here at Higley High School. So what makes a great sports facility? Certainly a safe, high-performing playing surface, one that inspires pride among our students, staff, and community. The multi-purpose playing field that can be used extensively, even in rain during months when the grass doesn't grow. Also environmentally friendly, that conserves water, eliminates the need for fertilizer or pesticides, decreased maintenance costs, including the cost of lining the field, and then obviously close proximity to a school's campus. But currently, our Higley Field was installed in the late, right around 2009, 2010. It was a TIF field, and that life has lived almost its complete use. You'll see some pictures there. We have worked to keep it look good, but the artist rendering of what a synthetic turf field would look like is there. And just to preface this conversation, I began sort of investigating artificial turf back in 2004 when I attended my first National Athletic Directors Conference in Anaheim and took a class on field turf and artificial field turf. And that investigation led to ultimately, as a district, installing and successfully having field turf now for 5 years at Waynesfield High School, who also happened to win a state championship on there with the field turf. Not there's any correlation, but just saying that was a benefit. I know that community has really enjoyed, and we're in year 5 with that facility, and it's still looking good and benefiting the community. So what is synthetic turf or artificial turf? It's grass-like that basically replicates the lush natural grass. And I want to clarify this too, because sometimes when we talk about artificial turf, and I sort of went that way too, people think of AstroTurf way back, the Houston Astrodome, and it was just almost like, a thin carpet that, had all kinds of bad connotations. And that is not what we're talking about in this day and age. And the technology, not unlike our computers, just is continually enhancing and advancing. And so it's exciting to see how much and how far they've come. But it's certainly a consistent and improving technology that really can enhance what our student athletes do. When used on a playing field, it does provide a consistent year-round, all-weather playing surface that's built to withstand extended use without downtime and recovery. And I do think that point is real critical. One of the main reasons why we went to artificial turf at Williamsfield was the lack of field extra practice space that they have. And really, for a natural grass field to look good, you need to limit the number of hours of use on it each year, because the best way for an artificial grass or a natural grass field to look good is to stay off of it. And so that was problematic at Williamsfield because we didn't want the football team and the band practicing in the parking lot. And so the advantage of having an artificial turf field, so at a natural grass at 600 hours in a year, you can push that up to really around 3,000 hours in a year. And so the ability to use it really is enhanced. And then also with our community education department, the ability to also rent that field. And there's been a number of state playoff semifinals and even championship soccer matches held at the Waynesfield Stadium, which does enhance our revenue and ability to do other things for the district. Also, most synthetic turf systems installed today include a drainage layer, and it has a multi-layered backing system that it's resilient and really makes it look and feel very much like natural turf. And there's just a quick picture with, and I'm not an expert on all of the pieces, but just to kind of show the detailed piece that is the synthetic turf with a turf layer, the infill that goes in the grass, and actually at that point I'm going to brought a couple object lessons. So the first items is when we researched for Waynesfield, the main technology in terms of infill for the fields at that time was the crumb rubber, which is really ground up higher. But at that time, we felt that we were concerned about the heat, and that is one of our biggest concerns in Arizona with an artificial turf field is because it gets hot. And the black crumb rubber with Arizona temperatures, especially in July and early August, we're concerned about that. And so the technology that existed then that we used, and this is the one that says 20 degrees. I'm gonna just pass this to Mr. Kovich. It's a green infill, which is very similar to what Waynesfield has, and it's by industry standards generally drops the ambient temperature, the temperature of the field by 20 degrees, and that technology at Waynesfield has been used very effectively, combined with another piece, and that's adding the water cannons. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that we have a natural artificial field. Why would we need water? And we don't water the field obviously to grow the artificial turf, but what we do is we use it when the field's really hot, and just prior to practice or just prior to a game, we put water on it, not for too long, about 20 minutes each section, and then basically what that does is it takes the temperature and it brings it down to make it very playable. So with a combination of the infill and then the water, it really makes it playable. Some of the schools in the valley that have added artificial turf and chose not to, or to stay with the crumb rubber, or not use the higher level infill, or not have the water cannons, are having trouble. In fact, they are not able to use their fields at some point in time because of the temperature. And so I'm proud that at Waynesfield, we had the foresight to make those decisions, and certainly my recommendation for Higley would be we do at least what Waynesfield had. Also, though, with technology and advancement, there is a new product that's, I'm going to pass you this as well. This is an organic compound, and I'll get it wrong if I try to describe all the things in there, but I know it's more biodegradable, but it enhances the ability to absorb water and retain it over time. And so in an effect, works very much like the crumb rubber, the green crumb rubber, but has a higher ability to hold water. And so it actually has the ability to bring the temperature down by 40 degrees. And so that's been used very effectively in California and Texas, and Mr. Buchholz and I went to San Antonio to investigate that, and we use what we like to call the Dr. Thomason method, and he's used it very effectively with air conditioning units, and it's just a heat gun that tells the temperature. And so we actually went out to the fields with the gun and measured the difference between crumb rubber versus the green infill versus we call that geofill, and it was substantially different. And so that would be something that as a committee, when we look at this, that I want to consider the benefits of that as we look forward, because ultimately, obviously, the bottom line for us is student safety, and certainly we don't want to be putting ourselves in a situation where we're causing other issues. But like I said, with our success at Waynesfield and working with Coach Campbell and Mr. Stengel there, they've been very pleased with the use of the water cannons and the infill that we had there. Certainly there is some maintenance that was required, but over time it's been very effective, and they've been able to use that even on days that are pretty hot. And so that was that piece. The other part that I want to also share, this is an added technology that can be considered, and so now when they prepare, a big part of the artificial turf when it goes on is the preparation that goes underneath. It's pretty extensive to add a drainage system, and there's also a pad kind of that they hand pour in place that adds to the stability of the work that they do underneath, and then this pad lasts and it adds to the GMAX, and I'll explain that. That's a layer that goes over top of the grading, and then the artificial turf would sit actually on top of that material. But what it does is it just extends the life of all the work underneath. And again, that would be a factor that we would look at and consider. Again, just as the technology advances, there's, that's another thing for us to consider. But please ask questions if I'm going too far.
Well, just, this is a simple one. The grounds crew training and stuff for maintenance, is it the same? We use the same crew, or? Yes. Although, and typically what we've done is we contract with an outside group that comes and does a quarterly service for us, and then just the
the weekly grooming or bi-weekly grooming would be done by our. Some other things you should know about artificial turf. I think I've already kind of said this a little bit. Could be utilized for around 3,000 hours per year with no rest required, where that's more than 3 times, I'd say more like 5 times than what natural grass. Also, synthetic turf fields they're not all the same. And we kind of talked about a little bit, the difference between the black crumb rubber versus the green infill versus the organic. And so that's something that would be considering in terms of what's best for the students. And obviously price is a factor as well, but we consider that. And as of December 2011, more than 7,000 synthetic turf fields have been used for football, soccer, field hockey, baseball, rugby, lacrosse. And about half the NFL teams are currently playing on synthetic turf. And since 2003, over 70 FIFA, that's soccer, under 17 and under U World Cup matches have been played with synthetic soccer fields. And our fields have actually been very popular. During soccer season, as you know, it's dormant season for grass, and so if you overseed, which is almost impossible with football going on, it really kind of is a downer for the soccer teams because their field just looks poor. And so that's one of the reasons why the AI has utilized Williams Field for semifinal and state championship soccer matches, because obviously the artificial turf field looks great even during soccer season.
Dr. Fowler, it's
Yes.
ironic you say that. I took my daughter in today for a concussion test for girls soccer.
Yes.
And he said that girls soccer is one of the highest concussion sports that we have. And then I was also reading and doing some research, and they are saying now that it is true that the artificial turf cuts down on concussions. And
Yes.
that's a big deal.
Yes, and,
Concussions are a big
and they're
deal.
GMAX rated. In fact, in the warranty that we have with the fields, GMAX is a scientific test that they put on the field, and it's basically dropping mechanical function that measures how much bounce and force release on the field. And so that we have the fields tested, and if it doesn't meet a certain level, then based on our warranty, we have a chance to have them come back and improve that and or even replace the field depending on. So that's something that we work on, and there's been fields in the area that have been replaced a couple times. In fact, Campo Verde's field's been replaced a couple times because of it failing on the GMAX rating, and so that's something else that we keep on top of. But yeah, certainly concussion and student safety is a big plus with synthetic turf fields. Also, just greater peace of mind. I know this goes to probably a Today Show article maybe 3 or 4 years ago that was really not scientific, and one reporter that just sort of got an idea and just ran with it without really any research behind it. But there is a lot of evidence in that the material is safe. It provides a uniform and consistent playing surface in terms of traction, rotation, and slip resistant. And there's been more than 75 independent, credible research studies that have validated the safety of synthetic turf, and I have access to a lot of those. If you want some more research, just let me know. I'm certainly very research-based on this topic as well, so we want to stay on top of those pieces. Really also a positive impact, depending on the size or region of the country. It can save between 500,000 to 1 million gallons of water each year. And that can be about 6 billion gallons of water throughout its use over the years that we've had those. Also, most synthetic sports fields feature the crumb rubber infill. That's from used tires. So that also helps in terms of keeping those out of landfills. Although the technology that I'm recommending for infill goes above what the crumb rubber tires do. And also that synthetic turf currently installed has eliminated the need for nearly 1 million pounds of harmful pesticides and fertilizer, which also has significant health and environmental implications as well. So why Higley High School? Really provides our athletic teams game and practice space, band practice, physical education classes, and it's really a cost-effective maintenance. Upkeep of a synthetic field costs 2 to 3 times less than natural turf. Community education, use and involvement. The community education can rent the field, and fees bring in additional revenue, and we've been very successful with that at Williams Field. Also allows for multi-use facility where we can showcase a facility that our community and students will take pride in, and we don't have to go too far with, as we know, we live in a very competitive neighborhood, And there happens to be actually now soon 3 charter high schools in our attendance area. And the 2 that are established and operating both installed artificial turf fields. And so, as we know, people are trying to recruit students, whether that be legal or not, but it's occurring. And so certainly that's, again, something that is a factor when students decide where they want to go to high school.
Dr. Fowler?
Yes, sir.
I would also like to remind the board that we also had a safety issue with with Higley High School's football field last year due to the building across the railroad tracks ran all of the gophers and all the field mice over to the Higley High School fields, and we were trapping at least 30 to 40 animals a week, and they were growing faster than we could safely take them out of our fields. And so actually the year before last year, we had to shut down the baseball fields because they were unsafe to play on.
Yes, and if you've seen the movie Caddyshack, you'll kind of know what we're talking about. Williamsfield High School. So obviously Williamsfield High School, this is the when we did the grand opening, obviously has artificial turf, and it's been very successful there. We're in year 5 of the use there. Also some other, just a few that I've mentioned, Campo Verde in Gilbert. All the Paradise Valley High Schools have had it, and now recently Scottsdale has added them as well. And those are just the ones really close by. There are others as well. How much does it cost? At this point, we're anticipating the field and the turf or the track, and I have that piece. Because at Higley High, when the field was done back in 2010, also the track was done, and we've repaired it a couple times, but that surface will need to be recovered, and so that cost would include the track resurfacing as well as the field. We have worked with some vendors and are proposing a winter installation. Part of the benefit of that would be to leverage the construction companies during the slow season. As you know, most construction companies, their go time or their peak season is from, spring through the start of school, and that's especially the case with this type of work. We're able to get permission to move forward on this. Then what would happen is we'd be able to leverage that and take advantage of companies and their sub-trades and workers in a time when they're not going 110 miles an hour. So that would be an advantage as well on this. How can we pay for this? I want to report that community education has done a great job with the revenue and pieces that they generate. This would not come from M&O bond funds, but Civic Center, which is where that money goes, that community ed raises, as well as Fund 5630, which is gift and donations, really impact fees, and that's fees that, as you know, as the houses continue to develop, we had a lull for quite a while, but we've started to gain some revenue again, and it's impact fees that the builders pay to the district to help offset the costs, one-time costs for that, and so that would be the source of that funding, which would impact anything that Mr. Holland has showed you previously. The time frame that we're proposing, again, like I said, my investigation on artificial turf actually started 2014, but more recently, for this one spring and the current summer, we have visited multiple sites, including here in the Phoenix area as well as San Antonio, Texas. Mr. Buholtz attended with me there. We're in the process of tonight updating you regarding procurement. The companies that we've looked at are on the national cooperative, which allows us to get best pricing kind of countrywide. But what would propose if the board saw fit was to use that national cooperative, but have those companies come and give us their best price and do an evaluative process that would happen soon, and then I would bring back those results to the board, and we could award our vendor to move forward. We would, with the board's permission, plan to have construction. I know it's a tight window, but December through March. The athletic director at Higley High School is prepared, if with permission, to have soccer played in their practice field and or at other sites if needed, so we can get back for the spring season, which would be track and field. And then if all would go according to plan, then we'd be looking at an August 2019 opening game and ribbon cutting. Really, the bottom line, though, installation of a synthetic turf field will provide a first-class multi-purpose facility to maximize the use of the Higley Stadium in a way that will benefit both the student athletes, sports teams, parents, and the entire community. At this point, I've worked with Ms. Diab, Aaron Dilly, the athletic director, Coach Subi, Benny Buholtz, Jacob Dolan, Karen Finn, and I'm sorry I neglected, but Mark Etchemunde, the soccer coach, is also part of our evaluation committee as well, and just appreciate these people for their time and effort spent, and the next steps, with the board's approval, next steps would be a final evaluation of those vendors that I referenced that are on the national cooperative, that being like One GPA or Mojave, and then we'd receive the final bids and select a vendor based on that, then provide updates to the board as we move forward throughout this projected.
Dr. Fowler?
Yep.
So you have on there to do vendors being considered through the national cooperatives of One GPA. Can we make sure that we vet these vendors ourselves? As you referenced, Scottsdale does have turf fields.
Mm-hmm.
They used One GPA.
No,
and
I understand.
They're being looked at.
Well, can I speak to that too? Because, and to be fair, although I was involved in our field the last time, I wasn't involved in the procurement process. And I can tell you that we didn't need to pay for an architect. We didn't need to pay for a construction company. I mean, there was multiple layers, and so we're aware of that. And what we're trying to do is remove some of those layers, because every layer that you pay is money that the district doesn't pay. And so, yes, in fact, that is something that we're certainly doing, and I'll bring those recommendations back to you as a board. But there is, I think, savings to be had by being wise about the process and not paying money for things that you don't really need. And so I appreciate your comments, though, and we're on the same page for sure.
Keep
President
us out
Reese?
of legal trouble.
Yes.
President Reese, members of the board, I would also like to say is that we're adding a second level of scrutiny to the process, even though we do have the consortiums that have gone out there and should be the best price for these supplies and equipment and turf fields and buildings in that case. We're also bringing them in to give them a second and final proposal to come to the district and give us their best price.
I can answer any other questions at this time.
What have you learned different from Williamsfield as we move to Higley?
What have I learned differently, or
Yeah,
what would I consider?
What are we going to do different with Higley that we learned as a result?
Well, one of the things that I'm completely convinced that we'll do differently is we won't pay for an architect. We won't pay for a construction company that pays for another person that pays for another person. So we're going to eliminate a bunch of the layers that we had in that project. I think that we want to make sure that we capture the water cannons and at least the green fill that Waynesfield used. So not doing that would be bad. So certainly a lot of what we've learned, I think, is that we did it correctly for the most part in terms of the installation for Waynesfield. So we'll be doing the same things. The things that we would consider still, and it'll depend on price, obviously, is whether we would do the geofill, the higher level organic fill, and then whether or not we would include a pad underneath. So those are the two things that would be different if we didn't do exactly how Waynesfield did. But the other thing to consider is, these fields are 10 to 12 years, and so I think any new technology enhancements or improvements that happen in Higley will certainly inform that. And when it comes, in 5 or 6 years, when it's time to do Waynesfield, we hope that the company that we choose, we build a good relationship with, and then we'll just be able to roll that into and bring those improvements. That'll probably even be better in 4 or 5 years, at Higley. And so the fact that we have seen those benefits and it really is enhanced Williamsfield, will certainly at least have that, but likely more at Higley as well.
As you did the presentation, we talk about this field, it's synthetic, okay? And my concern always when I hear that word, it's not natural. And I'm always concerned about the toxicity in reference to, and as I've watched over the years, building products, we've had wood floors in our homes, and a couple years later, we've had drywall in our homes. Where are we at with this? And I guess my concern would be, how can we guarantee where the product is made? And is the product made in this country?
Yes.
And, okay, and we're
Yes.
guaranteed that it's not subcontracted and brought in from some other country, and then so many years later, we get things happening here? That's my concern, really.
Yeah, and I certainly am not an expert, but the field turf, artificial turf industry is really the same companies in the south that make carpet, and so the carpet mills, it's really carpet for outside, and so it's all made in like Georgia, in the south part of the United States. So that it's made here. In the warranty that we would expect and that we have for Williamsfield, we would also want to carry for Higley is that it doesn't break down and it holds that GMAX rating. And I think that there's an 8-year warranty on the GMAX rating, and so we would we wouldn't enter into any arrangement that wouldn't have that same level of quality and sustainability to the product. So it's certainly something that we would be looking to continue.
I get you. I'm just concerned that our students are running on, tires and things like that, and chemicals.
Yeah,
I'm
as I
just
referenced
concerned
before,
about
the tires is originally the chrome rubber tires. That is a technology that some of the fields have used. We haven't used that here. We already at Waynesfield 5 years ago went above that.
Okay.
And then Higley will not be putting ground up tires on Higley.
I think it's important for me that as you look at vendors, it's important for me that these vendors are from this country, okay?
Yes.
And the product's made in this country, so that we have a guarantee about the quality of product, and there's no second guessing on that. I think that's very important.
Yeah, your points are well taken, and yes, all the companies that we're investigating are all U.S. companies.
Okay.
Yeah, nobody from outside the country.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Dr. Fowler, as we look at this, did we do like a exact, maybe this is more for Mr. Holland, so what we spend per year right now on a field at Higley versus what we are spending per year? Like, what is that cost savings per year versus watering versus not watering?
I have that. I have that. I can send it to you, but typically, and it's a little tricky because, as you know, we've been working with limited budget, and so to be honest, the last 4 or 5 years, we haven't spent the type of money that we actually needed to spend on our natural grass field. But typically, the maintenance labor cost for a grass field is about $27,000 a year,
Okay.
and an artificial turf field would be much less than that, more like about $10,000. But things like equipment, $4,000 a year, fertilizer, $8,000 a year, top seed, $5,000, water is $15,000 by itself, and then for painting the lines, probably $3,000 to $4,000, and then so your annual costs on top of the maintenance and labor would be $63,000 versus synthetic, which is about $12,000. So I can send that even through Dr. Thomason on a
Okay.
superintendent's report.
Okay. Thank you for that. And my other question was, cleats. So do all those athletes that are like freshmen now and playing on regular fields are all going to have to go out and get new equipment?
Exactly the same
Same.
cleats. The field is designed to handle the rubber cleats that they wear on a natural grass field is the same as an artificial turf field.
And my last point is, when we do this field, I want it to be done right the first time. And I've had this conversation, I believe I talked to Dr. Thomason about it, but there's no talk of adding additional bleachers on the visitor side of Higley, which to me is a concern that we don't do that right now. As we grow and we're playing Castile and we're playing other schools that are local that come to these games, it's going to be such a fiasco. I hate to say it on Friday night. It's going to be so crowded. So has there been talk about that? Is that a conversation that could take place?
We've had conversations about adding bleachers, but that's an additional expense. And the bleacher is really different. It doesn't affect the playing surface, so we could add bleachers. Yeah, that could happen. In fact, the companies that we're looking at could do that as well, but it's just a budgetary factor.
Maybe they'll throw it in for free.
No, unfortunately not. But
Okay, I'm
but
dreaming, but you know, you
Dr.
gotta ask.
Dr. Thomas and I and Principal Diab and Athletic Director Dilly, we've had those conversations. It's just a matter of we know, and even at Waynesfield has lots of needs and things that they'd like to do too. So I have it on the radar, but we can only kind of do one thing at a time, and we'll keep doing what we can do. But you know, I'd really like to help Waynesfield have a field house. They don't have a field house, and so you know, we have to keep, you know, working with the limited funds. I'm always hopeful that the state will continue to provide us more capital funding. And so we're going to keep something here, something at Waynesfield, you know, other schools, and trying to, obviously, we've worked very well utilizing the State Facilities Board and having a lot of things paid for. Certainly this isn't something that they would pay for, otherwise we'd have them pay for it, but
And I do appreciate the unique funding of this field, so thank you for that.
yes.
President Reese, members of the board too, it's a continual struggle to balance out the needs of the district, both academically, athletically, and through the arts. And so we try to make sure we give all areas a little bit of love every year, and especially try to balance out what's happening at both Williamsfield and Higley High School. Unfortunately, the size of the acreage that we have at different schools really makes a large impact on Williamsfield High School. Williamsfield does have 20 less acres of property than Higley High School. And so we need to make sure that we take all that into account and try to balance things out as best we can. It's not an easy balancing act, but we're trying the best we can to make sure that both schools are equal in all aspects of academics, arts, and athletics.
Dr. Fowler, I just have one question. As we mentioned that we had some issues with the baseball field, why are we not looking at doing both at the same time in reference to taking a look at that field?
The expense.
Expense.
I mean, expense, yeah, it would be $3 million or more, and we just
okay.
don't have that funding.
Okay, that's fine.
Dr. Fowler, thank you for the presentation. One thing I'd want to bring up is just warranty. I don't know what the warranty is on Williamsfield. 8 years, 7 years?
8 to 10, I'd have to check for sure. Typically, that's the life, and it does depend on a couple factors, whether it's an issue with the GMAX rating or if it's the material. And so, you know, we'd be looking for something similar, obviously, in this one as well. And so, a company that's going to stand behind their product is big for us, and something that has staying power. So,
And realistically, I think you mentioned 10 years. The field's supposed to last 10 years, then we'll have to go through the similar
it's
exercise.
a safer bet. There are fields that, and when I investigated this back in 2014, I went down to Tucson and checked Tucson High that their field was 12 years old, and they were still using it, but it was showing a lot of wear. And so I think depending, you're reasonable to think 10 to 12 years is probably the industry average, although because the technology keeps improving, you know, that's something to consider. But, you know, most fields are lasting about 10 years.
And then at
longer.
that time, what would be the cost? Probably not 1.2 million
No.
again.
Yeah, no, so the second time, the expense is about at least a half to two-thirds, because a lot of the initial cost is preparing the underwork and what goes on top. And so basically, if you do that well the first time, when you come back, it's really just taking the old carpet off and putting new carpet on. So the expense is reduced quite a bit the second time you install. So that's.
And maybe I misunderstood, but we were talking about the cost, the annual cost of grass versus what the maintenance cost of turf would be. And let's say it's generous and grass is $50,000 more than the
To
turf
maintain.
is to
To maintain
maintain
each
on a
year.
on a going forward basis. So after 10 years, that's a savings of $500,000
Yes,
versus the 1.2
President
million.
Reese, members of
Yeah.
the board, I would also like to stay in this aspect. Even if we have a natural gas field, that field needs to be recrowned out of cost about $350,000 to $400,000 every 10 years also. So even if we had natural gas, we would have to make sure that the field is recrowned, and we take that into consideration too. So the return on investment for artificial turf is about 7 to 10 years. About the lifespan would be the return on investment. But you get a much safer product for kids to play on and a much nicer looking facility.
That's exactly what I was asking. Thank you, Dr. Thomason. This is probably an informal thing, but did we poll the students, football players who played on the turf versus the grass? Do we know the students care?
No, but I have a parent who's very involved at the other school that if she's willing to tell us what who happens to start, he happened to start this Saturday for the Air Force. So what did Trey think about playing on artificial turf? You're okay, Ms. Bug, with answering.
Oh, wow, a microphone and everything. Thanks, I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone's time here. He enjoyed playing on turf. I mean, he had the opportunity to play both on grass. I think there was grass at Williamsfield when we first got to Williamsfield. And then we did transition to turf. Turf plays faster. Turf is harder. So, I mean, you can see us all kind of looking at each other when you're talking about safety. That one of the challenges with turf, and it is also documented on the other side of the aisle, is turf is harder. So unlike natural ground, where natural ground absorbs the shock of a human body, you know, turf, it's negotiable. It depends on what and how the field is prepped underneath the turf. It depends on how the field is maintained. It depends on the quality of the pellet that is used on the field and how it's dispersed and things along those lines. So proper care and maintenance is imperative when you're looking at a turf field. It is also extremely important to know that we're going to be saving money on irrigation, on overseeding. I think over the years, we can all agree in here as a means to saving costs. We've seen it on our baseball fields. Our ground crew is not the best in the school district. And so maintaining a TIF field is a difficult endeavor if we're not willing to put that money towards that. You know, we all here are from Williamsfield, and we support wholeheartedly Higley getting this field. We also support equality in all of the sports facilities too, and I think you all have my spreadsheet conveniently either at the end of an aisle or around you at some point, and I'd be happy to discuss that at a later time. Air Force just got a new field. Kelly Clarkson had a concert there and something went wrong, and I don't know how the field got damaged, but United States Air Force Academy now has a brand new field and they're working it in. So you also have to be cognitive that there is a work-in period for a turf field. So it will play different over the years as you transition to it. As the undersurfaces become a little more flexible and a little more pliable, you'll get a better play surface out of it as well. It's a progress. I mean, you know, it's a progression, and I think it's a good step for Higley Unified to have like facilities at each of our high schools, because I think it makes that choice for people coming into our district a little more of an even playing field.
Thank you for answering on the spot, and congratulations to Trey for what he's doing with the Air Force, and we're cheering for him again.
And so she actually answered several of my other questions.
Okay, that's good.
So
That's
thank
good.
you.
She's not a plant. She came on her own.
Yeah,
So.
hey, it's fortuitous. My last comment was just what were the negatives, any downsides to going to a turf field that you'd want to just share with the board?
I think just people like grass. I mean, in the really, really hot times, grass is going to still be a little bit cooler than artificial turf. I think I talked about ways that we mediate that. Those are a couple things right off the top. And yeah, some people just, you know, if you ask an NFL player, there's some people that prefer grass over artificial. But I mean, the quality of artificial turf now is so much improved that it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish. In fact, there's even a hybrid now where they mix artificial turf with natural grass, and I mean, we're not talking about that, but I mean, so it's getting closer and closer. I think those would probably be the two things that would, you know, if I was going to say any drawback, that would probably be the ones. Preference and temperature when it's really, really hot, but when it's 110, it's 110. So, you know.
All right, I'll try to wrap this up.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Bug, for that information, and Dr. Fowler, thanks for the work. I mean, you obviously did your homework. The proposal makes good sense to me. I look forward to seeing the vendor bids. Will it be the same committee?
Yes.
Looking at the bids?
Yes.
All right. And I wanted to thank Ms. Kaler for her comments. That's not something I would have thought of, but I think you're going to see more and more people coming to Higley High School for
Yes.
events on that field.
And it is Higley Castile, as Ms. Kaler so nicely kind of slid in there on Friday night, so that'll be a big game. So I think Castile's had it circled on their calendar for a while. So if you're
Right.
available, nice way to kind of usher in the fall break time, but it'll be a good game for sure.
I just have a question about rentals afterwards for you. It's
Sure.
not for the good of everybody, but
Okay.
that catch you
Thank
after.
you.
Thanks.
Dr. Fowler, doesn't AIA look at holding playoffs and stuff on turf fields? Is
Yes.
that
Yes.
so? Potentially, then that can help us get playoff games at Higley as well, since
Yes.
they would have a turf field.
Right, and again, I referenced it in the PowerPoint. It would be an opportunity for us. Our community education department
Right.
does a great job, and so yeah, it'll enhance some revenue. We'll be able to increase some revenue because of it's a facility that people will want to use and be able to rent that out.
But that
So,
is something AIA specifically looks at for those games.
yes, they almost never. I mean, almost all their playoff games, especially the upper levels, happen on artificial turf fields.
And President Reese, members of the board, turf fields for high schools are becoming the standard across the state too. So I would say that more than 50% of the high schools within Arizona have turf fields now.
Thank you. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Something else comes up later, but I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so we will move on to 4.5. I move that we approve the procurement of artificial turf for Higley High School.
Second?
Questions or comments? My only comment is the vendors. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0.
President Reese, members of the board, I'm making a recommendation to Dr. Fowler and to the board at this time that after we choose a final vendor, that we bring them in to present at the next board or work study.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, welcome back.
Making one.
And now you're going to review the 2017-18 fiscal year proceeds of capital improvement bonds, maintenance and operation override data, and presentation, as well as the estimated expenditures for the 2018-19 fiscal year.
I'm gonna write it down. So I had something to talk.
Now, on my presentation, this indicates it's a public hearing? Or is it just a presentation?
President Reese, it is not a public hearing. It is a public presentation.
Okay.
So a public hearing is not required. It is just an informational item presented as a public presentation in a public meeting.
Perfect.
I see that it's labeled public hearing.
I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
We just had previously always presented it in a public hearing setting, but the law does not, state statute does not require it to be in a public hearing setting, just a public meeting. Okay, so I do have a couple more jokes, so let's see how these go. Why couldn't the pony sing himself a lullaby?
Because he was a little horse?
Oh, yes. You get a coin. Okay, so the next one. How much does it cost a pirate to get an earring?
A buccaneer?
Yes, good job. You stole the show. Game over.
Now, who's the one with the little kids still?
So, good evening, President Reese, members of the board, Dr. Thompson, Cabinet, our distinguished Higley community. Tonight, I come to you and bring you a presentation regarding our capital and bond override projects from the 17-18 school year. So we'll first start with, we have our 15% maintenance and operation override that our community approved for us at the November 2015 election, which took effect July 1st of 2016, so our 16-17 school year. We also have, is that better? Is that better? No? Okay. We also have our voter-approved bonds that was from our November 2013 election. So first we'll start with our override. So in accordance with Arizona Revised Statutes 15481Y, the state requires that the district to hold a public meeting to share with our community how we utilized our 15% M&O or maintenance and operation override during the 17-18 school year. This presentation, as it references, is to take place between September 1st and October the 31st of each year. So our maintenance and operation override, as I mentioned, was approved at the November 2015 election. The override was approved to help the district's efforts to help maintain present levels of service in all of our maintenance and operation programs. Specifically, on the election ballot, we indicated our categories would be increase teacher compensation, maintain and approve elementary specials, provide staffing to reduce average class size, provide gifted, SPED, and all-day kindergarten, as well as provide education resources to our classrooms. So last year, in 17-18, our budget was a little over $9.4 million. How we utilized those funds last year, we spent a little over $1.1 million for teacher increase, salary increase compensation. To improve those elementary specials that I referenced was a little over $669,000. To provide staffing to reduce our average class sizes was a little over $4.7 million. To support our gifted, SPED, and all-day K was a little over $2.2 million. And then additional resources to the classrooms was a little over $850,000. That does bring us to a total of a little over $9.6 million. And I just would like to note that the district did cover that overage out of the maintenance and operation budget itself. We talked about some teachers' compensation. So last year, the district was able to give a 2% salary increase for all staff, and we try each year, strive, to be able to provide at least a small increase to staff each year, if, of course, funding is available. We were able to implement the longevity stipends and provide the additional resources for classrooms. We were able to sustain our art, music, band, and PE programs. We were able to start the new curriculum adoption process, as we have spoke of. We were able to reinstate some additional money for our substitutes, our lunch aides, reinstate one of our bus routes. That is not, of course, this is some of the items. That is not, of course, an exhaustive list. Our proposed or estimated budget for next year is a little over $10.4 million. Questions on our override? Okay. So before we start with our bonds, we have another question, another joke. So why are seagulls called seagulls? Because if they flew over the bay, they'd be called bagels. Dun, dun. So again, same presentation. Now we're going to discuss our bond expenditures. Again, ARS, so Arizona Revised Statutes 15.491K. Same situation. hold a public hearing to present how we utilize our bond dollars in the 17-18 school year, again, to be presented to our community between September and October the 31st. The bond dollars that I speak of, again, as I mentioned, those were bond dollars that were approved at the November 2013 election. So these were voter-approved bonds for a total of a little over $70.5 million. We sold bonds over the next 3 years. So in FY14, we sold our first bond for a little over 25.7. 15 was 19 million, and our last bond to sell was in March, April timeframe of 2016 for a little over 25.7 million, bringing us to our total allocation of 70.5. How have we utilized those bond dollars to date? So again, in our election pamphlet, we had to explain exactly how those funds would be utilized. So you'll notice our approved estimated costs. We had some new construction where we estimated about 30 million. To date, we've spent a little over 18.8 million. So we have about $10 million remaining in that particular category. For new buildings, for existing school sites, we had 5 million. We spent a little over 4.1, so we have about 866,000 to go. Land for new schools, 7 million. We've spent 2.3 because we did purchase some land in the previous school year. So we do have a balance in that category of a little over 4.6. Technology, 7 million. We have utilized that at about 9.5, so we're over in that particular category. Pupil transportation, we had about 4. We've utilized so far about 3 million, so we have about 905 left. And so we will be purchasing some buses in the 18-19 school year, so it'll be utilizing the balance of those. So all in all, we started with 70.5. We've spent a little over 53.5, so we have a balance of approximately 16.7 million. Talking about some of the examples of how those funds were utilized. So we did build and open a new elementary school, Bridges. We did have some building additional classrooms at Williamsfield, Coronado, Higley High School, Power Ranch, Sauceman. We had some repair and maintenance of existing schools, some painting and new flooring, fence repairs, etc. We have been purchasing new marquees for each of our elementaries, and as I mentioned, in 17-18, we purchased marquees for Coronado and Santan. I also mentioned the buses that we have previously purchased. We have worked on developing a refreshed plan for our technology, as well as our buses, as well as district fleet. And so all those categories are taken into consideration. Our current debt ratio is approximately 23 to 24%. And as per Arizona Revised Statute, the limit is up to 30% of the assessed evaluation. So to give you an idea. So currently, the district is working with Stiefel, as I referenced a little bit earlier, who is our financial advisor dealing with our bonds, to determine a long-range plan, because we will need, unfortunately, to go back to our voters to ask for assistance because the state still does not provide enough capital to be able to meet the district's capital needs and demands for the future. Questions?
It's just maybe more of a comment, and I just want to credit the administration. You know, I think in years past, some of these things, some of these items that Higley would end up purchasing really was a sort of feast or famine kind of thing. And so you had to buy like a ton of buses or a ton of new copiers or a ton of computers all at once for everybody. And so, you know, getting things on a refresh cycle for buses, copy machines, all that stuff is, I know it's hard work, but it just makes everything much more manageable and easy, and it's a credit to your leadership, Dr. Thomason.
Just a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you say we're allowed up to a 30% debt ratio,
So the cap, so you're not able to go back out for, say, a new bond, request the voters to be able to issue a new bond, because we don't, your cap is at 30%, and right now we're at 23 to 24%. So we need to pay down some more of our debt to increase that or decrease that ratio, so we have more of a gap to work with. Does that make sense?
so that debt ratio is only on bonds and overrides?
Yes. Just the bonds.
Just bonds, okay. So then that doesn't take into account our debt ratio for our middle schools?
Unfortunately not. Because we did not utilize bond funds to cover those expenses. So that's not a factor.
Just
President
clarifying.
Reese, members of the board, that brings up a great point, though, is that our next bond we go out for, I hope that it would be utilized to pay off those middle schools, because that would be $4.4 million a year that would come back into our budget.
So on the slide where it shows the Panther, make sure we're all on the same, my screen went out, but, so you can't move these monies around the way it was funded, correct? The way it was voter approved?
So you mean particular categories?
Correct.
So statute does allow you a 10% variation, so a $7 million flexibility within the categories. And you'll notice some of our categories, like our technology, we're already over in that particular category. So we've already started to utilize some of that fluctuation or variance, flexibility. Yes, ma'am. Any other questions before I go forward? Okay. So next, I have some pictures for you of some of the items that we have purchased, and I have some additional information for you at the end. So there is the marquee for Coronado that I have been referencing several times tonight. Next, there's that project that I was referencing earlier at Gateway Point. So we had our building that we repainted, as well as we painted a new mural there at Gateway Point. We talked already about the field at Higley High. We talked about the library remodel that was done last year at HTA. There's another marquee at Santan. So here is, as we've known about the additions that took place at Williamsfield, as well as here's a picture of another marquee that was done there at their school. We talked about new turf. So here you have pictures of the turf at Gateway. You've seen some of those pictures before, as well as the turf in the middle. That's actually Williamsfield. And you can see in the background, there's that emblem that I just showed you a couple minutes ago. So where are we going from here? So for our 18-19 school year, we have some proposed capital projects, because we've talked about how much funding did we have, how much money have we utilized, how much money do we spend next year, and what are we proposing for the coming school year. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a sample of, example of a few items. So we have upcoming weatherization and enhancement projects that will be done at Coronado and at Santan. That expense will be shared with the School Facilities Board. But as I mentioned, the School Facilities Board will pay for the weatherization of the building itself. However, additional enhancements that need to be done, like changing out all the lighting, painting all of the fences, adding all the murals and everything back, all of those expenses are district expense that we will have to cover. Next, we have some fence paintings and lighting upgrades, as well as at various locations, not just those that are getting the weatherization taken care of. Again, the district plans to utilize our bond dollars and our capital dollars to help cover those particular expenses. And then, of course, as I said, this is just some examples of a few. So we do have other capital projects that may be determined as we go through the year.
Mr. Holland, perhaps this is a question better for Dr. Fowler or Dr. Thomason. Have we looked at, I saw lighting updates, have we looked at lights for the Williamsfield baseball field at all, or what that costs? It may be beyond the scope, but I'm just curious.
Yep, President Reese, members of the board, we have looked at that. That would be a bond expenditure. We're taking a look at all of our funds to try to bring both schools up to the same level. But I got to tell you, it's not an easy task. One year we do something for Williamsfield, one year we do something for Higley High School. But I'm not sure that we will ever get them to be the same facilities across the board, just because of the difference in the size of the school sites for both schools. I mean, I think we're going to have to do some special things at Williamsfield High School to bring them up to par with Higley High School, just because they do have 20 less acres of property than Higley High School. Higley High School has all those back lots and that back land, and so we're going to have to try to find a way to utilize facilities in a more creative way to make them equal.
So planning for the future. So currently, our public relations area, so Michelle Reese and her team, are currently working to develop a web page for the district. It'll be referred to as Your Dollars at Work. This web page, the intent of the page is to be able to utilize and show our community all of the multiple projects that we have been able to do with our bond dollars, with our override dollars. So you have some great pictures, more than what I've been showing you here, as well as a lot of detail explaining exactly what is a maintenance and operation override, what can those funds be used for, what are bond dollars, what's the statute require. So it's an educational piece as well as informational, and where we have been in the future to where we're planning to go. Excuse me, try that again. Where we have been in the past to where we hope to go in the future. As I've already mentioned that it is the district's hope and plan to be able to go back to our community at the November 2019 election and ask our community to approve the continuation of our 15% maintenance and operation override. Again, it's been a true blessing for the district to be able to have that, those override dollars to help meet all of the increasing budget needs and demands. And of course, so we're very thankful for that, and we'd like to be able to continue that. But we won't be able to continue that without our voter approval.
Mr. Holland, sorry to interrupt you, but I think your work and your staff's work should contribute to the confidence that the public feels in continuing this. So that's my hope, is that the voters will recognize the prudence with which we're operating within our budget and continue with that vote of confidence for you, your staff, Dr. Thomason.
So thank you. On that note, I believe I've mentioned before, however, if I have not, each year our bond investors do a due diligence review, and they look at how we have been managing district funds, and have we been overspending, have we been managing them appropriately, have we been being conservative, are we late with our bills, and I'm happy to report that they did look over a 3-year period of time and was very pleased with the results of where we have been to where we are now. And since we have not had to utilize those TANs funds that Dr. Thompson referred to. Now those funds, of course, are put in place, so it's kind of like some extra money that you borrow that you pay a huge fee to put into your bank account, so that when your state payments come, because remember, the state requires you to operate your entire year basically on 75% of your budget, and they only give you a portion of money each month. And there will be times, of course, when the districts may have a cash shortage. And so when they have a cash shortage, meaning that say their M&O account is negative, they have to utilize those TANs funds or register warrants to cover that expense. And for the past 3 years, we have not had to utilize TANs or registered warrants because of the fiscal planning that we do each year. And so after looking at all of that, we did receive a bond rating increase. So they did improve our credit rating. And so it was very nice, which what does that mean? What does that calculate out to? Basically, we're able to save millions of dollars in interest. So kind of put a money factor to it. So it was a very happy day when they made their final decision.
Mr. Holland, this is a good time, and I always do it to Dr. Fowler, but he deserves it. So Dr. Fowler and his team, it's always worth noting that you guys all know this, and I'm a broken record, but there are some people who don't know this, but he and his team have saved Higley millions of dollars working through the bureaucracy of the School Facilities Board, and every dollar that they go down and fight and get is just another dollar that we can then spend on other projects within the scope of the bond, and it's a real credit to the work, relentless work that you do, and it saves us and makes our schools better.
That is correct. Dr. Fowler and his team have brought in about $5 million in grant funding from the School Facilities Board, which has been
What was that amount again for last year only?
Pardon me?
What was the amount for last year? 5.5 million?
Yes.
He just
said
wanted
5
it
million.
loudly in the mic. You can say it again, Dr. Thomason.
Our next bullet is that we will potentially be asking so we talked about our override next, because we still have a huge capital need and demand here at the district. We have been discussing the option of going back to our community and asking them to consider approving a capital override so that the district has the resources of the funding available to be able to meet our increased capital demands. Right now, we're trying to utilize our M&O override and what we can move from there over into help meet capital needs. Any money that we can take out of our maintenance and operation budget as a whole, and other resources that we can pull together. It would be helpful to be able to have those additional funds so that we could continue on with our technology refresh plan and be able to replace student devices throughout the district as well. What I was trying to add, but I was running into my picture there, was that I just wanted to also have that disclaimer in there to please note that we will be coming back and bringing you a future presentation and a work study to discuss each of those different particular bullets.
Thank you, and I think it's important to kind of note on the continuation of the maintenance and operation override is that as Prop 206 continues to make its way through the years it was approved, there's another increase in January to the state minimum wage. And then in January of 2020, it will have an additional dollar increase to the state minimum wage. And even for any of our hourly employees, even making more than minimum wage, that also drives up their wages and it increases their rates so that can, based on the job that they do, that there is a gap between minimum wage and what they're paid. And so as that continues, and that's between now and 2020, that's going to increase by $1.50 per hour, that's going to drive up our maintenance and operation costs. That's our salaries and all of our hourly people. So with that 15% maintenance and operation override, that helps us cover those increases. Because Mr. Glover, we know the state doesn't do that for us, right? So we're not funded anymore for those increases either. So I just wanted to mention that because of the timing of that discussion that we'll have for that proposed election is right before that dollar increase goes into effect. So I think that's important to realize as well.
That is correct. So as far as information to share, that's all I have. Do you have any other questions?
I just have one. In reference to the communication with the community of future increases, I know we're talking about putting a website on a strategic plan and things like that. It's important that we bring our story to the community. We don't sit here and wait for them to look at our website, because we have people that don't have children in the community and going to schools, so nobody knows our story unless we bring the story to them. I have mentioned in the past the importance of a community newsletter that shows all the great things you have done, as well as the stories about our students and what's happening in our schools. So I think that's, to look at a website, it's not going to get that story out there. And we have a wonderful story to tell across the board, and I think we need to be a little bit more proactive than just having a website and expecting the community to support us, because I don't want to start going in the community in September of 2019 and all of a sudden start saying, vote for this. We need to start building a relationship now with our community and telling our story now.
President Reese, Mr. Wutovich, yes, I agree. The development of a website was just another form of communication to be able to have that information out there. But yes, we have talked about a newsletter. We have talked about, running advertisements, or that's not the correct word, but signs of appreciation on all of our digital marquees, thanking our communities for our override, for our bond dollars, letting them know that those funds are hard at work. But I wholeheartedly agree and advocate very, very much so that this needs to be an ongoing, continuous message now. I don't want to be waiting until next year when we are preparing to go to the voters to all of a sudden start giving them this information. It needs to be an ongoing, continuous message.
And President Reese, members of the board, we are more than a year out before we would ask the public to vote on something, and so we believe in getting the word out early and getting the word out often. So thank you, Mr. Wutovich, for bringing that to light, and we need to continue doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Thank you for you and your team for putting this together. We appreciate it, and kudos to you guys getting our bond rating increased. That's definitely you and your staff, so we appreciate that very much. And like Mr. Thornock said, increasing the financial trust of our community in what we're doing with our money.
And just a reminder to the board, in the superintendent's report a couple weeks back, even though Higley Unified School District's bond increased, you saw across the nation that school districts' bonds decreased because of the charters. So as we're going up, most school districts within the United States are going down. So that's credit to our finance team. So good job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, that concludes our meeting. So I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Have a good evening.